Let's start with the Cleveland Indians, who close out the Toronto Blue Jays. And you could pass credit all over the place, but you have to start with Terry Francona and how he managed this staff after they lost Danny Salazar and Carlos Carrasco, both who were 11-game winners throughout the season, sub-3, mid-3 ERAs. I mean, big parts of that rotation go down, but they still manage to do this in convincing fashion and get to their first World Series since 1997.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the big part of that, of course, you mentioned in Terry Francona, is the message and the way that he delivers it, right? Baseball is a different sport. It's 162 games. You got to be able to deal with the ups and downs. Things are going to happen. You're going to have injuries. And if you're not careful, you can panic. And if you have a higher-strung manager, you may struggle in that situation, especially, losing Salazar right near the end of the season and Carrasco both. I mean, Salazar went down first, then Carrasco right near the end of the year. And, people were writing obituaries for what the Cleveland Indians were going to go through in the postseason once they lost Carrasco on top of Salazar. But Terry Francona, very even keel, same message all the time. He is one of my favorite managers to talk to. Whenever we do a national game, we get 15 minutes exclusive with the manager, and he's the best. I played for him. He was a bench coach in Detroit back in '96, actually the same year that I was with Greg Olson over there. And he's just a fantastic person. But the message is consistent. It is never one of panic. He is as easy as it comes when you talk about a manager that you can play for and stay relaxed. I know that's Joe Madden's MO as well, but he just doesn't put the pressure on those guys. And so when it came to the injuries and the hurdles that they've had to deal with, and don't forget Michael Brantley. When they lost Michael Brantley at the beginning of the year and it looked like he wasn't going to be back at all, it's very easy. It was very easy to write this team off. A lot of people did it, myself included, and the resilience, I mean, you have to give credit to the players, but it's also the message that comes from up top with Terry Francona.
CJ Nitkowski joining us here on CBS Sports Radio, also on CBS Sports Radio on the weekends as host of CBS's Eye on Baseball. Now, CJ, I look at the statistics. Forget the pitching stats for a second because they were amazing. And we'll get to Andrew Miller, who may go down as the greatest midseason trade in the history of the sport if things continue the way that the Cleveland Indians hope that they do. But they're not hitting either. Is this a danger for them going forward if they stay slumping with the bats?
It can be. I mean, the thing about the Indians is they are a much better team than people actually expected them to be offensively. I actually had one of their games early in April, sitting there talking to Francona. He told me, we're not going to score runs. We're not a good offensive team. We're going to have to keep games close. That's our best chance of winning these games. Well, the offense actually turned out to be significantly better, I think, than anybody thought during the regular season. And as the season went on, it was, okay, when's the other shoe going to drop? This can't keep up. Track records tell us otherwise, and it never did. And they continued to hit. Now, come postseason time, we have the same conversation with the Cubs, right? You look at their numbers, they have not been great. Of course, they go out and score 10 runs last night, but the point of that being is that it's not always necessarily about what the numbers are, but who's getting the big hits. Can they deliver in big situations? Francisco Lindor has delivered a couple of times with his couple of home runs. Jason Kipnis, a couple of home runs. The batting averages, they're not looking good at all. Carlos Santana, big home run. It has happened when it has needed to happen. Coco Crisp has 2 home runs this postseason, but hitting just 214. Things that people really are not expecting. So the batting average, without a doubt, is not there when you look at the postseason. The big thing is, can they score a couple of runs, which they have been able to? Can they get the big hit? They have been able to. And then can they hold it, right? They're not going to probably win, any 8 to 9 games, 9-8, whatever it's going to be. High-scoring games are probably not going to be the formula. So if they can contain the opposing offense, they'll have a chance. But the reality is, as we get deeper and deeper into the postseason, unlikely that we'll see this offense just explode and score a bunch of runs.
Now, you talk about containing an opposing offense. They did that with the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays only hit 201 in this series, and it didn't feel like the Blue Jays. Now, they're not the Blue Jays of last year where they were just explosive and hit home runs, it seemed like, at will. But it was a still pretty explosive Blue Jays roster. They contained it. Now, they did it with young guys. The kid who started last night, Ryan Merritt, at 11 innings pitched. Started one game in his career, but he was able to get through 4 innings. Basically, I mean, he faced the minimum amount of batters in 4 innings. So how can that happen? Like, how can you get to this stage and then rise to the expectation, even if you're that young of a player?
Probably the best thing with Ryan Merritt that really worked in his favor was that he sat at about 86 miles an hour and not 92 miles an hour. Because the Blue Jays actually struggle, and hitters will tell you if you start to go too slow and you get below the hitting speed, it can be really difficult. That's why sometimes we'll see these hitters striking out against position players when they pitch because they just don't throw hard enough. Now, Ryan Merritt doesn't throw that slow, but the idea of him actually not sitting there at around 90 to 92 would probably be a more comfortable at bat for those Blue Jays hitters. It was so fun to watch this kid because he's such a huge underdog. He had one start earlier in the season, and he did a really good job. And I remember asking Terry Francona, I said, hey, maybe this will be the guy that could fill in for you, with Carrasco and Salazar being out. He's like, I'm not quite sure yet. He's pretty inexperienced, and the stuff is not it's not going to overwhelm you. And so even he was a little bit tentative about what he could bring to the table. When you're a guy like that, you have to constantly prove yourself. He sat there, was not scared, didn't walk anybody, never walked guys in the minor leagues. His numbers were fantastic, didn't walk guys when he first got called up. But he sits there and he comes at you with 86. Now, he doesn't throw it down the middle. He can't live down the middle, but he legitimately just sits there and paints on the corners, has a great changeup, knew when to use his breaking ball. Now, if he goes around that order 3 times, they probably get him. And so 4 or 5 innings in a postseason game is probably the best you're going to see from him, and that's great. That's all they needed with that bullpen. But this guy was a treat to watch. It was really unbelievable. Like I said, easy to root for because he was such an underdog and taking advantage of a team that was down 3-1, all these right-handed power hitters that were a little bit anxious, trying to do too much, taking big swings, and then taking some really tough pitches on the corners. It was a lot of fun to watch, and he really carved those guys up with, again, what you look at almost seems like nothing overly impressive when it came to his repertoire.
Well, that's the genius of Terry Francona, again, pulling them after 4 1/3. We're talking to CJ Nitkowski here on CBS Sports Radio. CJ, let's get to Andrew Miller. Obviously comes over from the Yankees in that midseason trade. He's like the Swiss Army knife. You can use him whenever. He's used him as a closer. He's used him as a long inning guy. And how impressive was the ALCS MVP, Andrew Miller, in this series?
The stuff that we have seen over the last couple of years, him converting to the bullpen and what he has become after, a guy who really struggled as a starter, struggled with command, all the things that we saw from Andrew Miller and who he's become has been really impressive. Where he went over the top was this year when he got to Cleveland. He already had his contract, already knew how good he was, but he walks in the door day one and says, pitch me whenever you want. And that's just not a common thing in Major League Baseball. Now, he already has his contract, but a lot of guys know that you're going to get paid the deeper you're pitching in the game, right? If you have saves, you're going to get paid better than the guy who doesn't have saves. It's that simple. That's the way our system is right now. Andrew Miller could care less. I think that's a unique thing. I think we'll see more guys opened up to that. But the stuff is incredible. Lefty, righty, it doesn't matter. He's so long and he's so lanky. His ability to bounce back, to take on multiple innings, go 2+ when he has to, which he has done a couple of different times. But the openness, the unselfishness is not an easy thing to come by. I think that's probably, for me, what sticks out the most because you're not going to get all guys to be able to do that. And then the other guys feed off that. You make your bullpen better, even though you're the best arm down there, and you say, yeah, whatever, you need me in the 5th inning, I'll do it. And that's just not a common thing. And I think the other guys saw that, and they were already good, before he even got there, but he took them to another level. And I think the leadership by example there was extremely important.
That Cleveland mojo is for real. We know that the Cleveland Indians are going to the World Series for the first time since 1997. We're talking to CJ Nitkowski, Fox Sports and MLB analyst and host of CBS's Eye on Baseball. Let's move over to the NLCS. We finally saw some hits from the Cubs. We saw some guys come through. Zobrist had to bunt to get on base, but it worked in the 4th inning. Then we see Addison Russell go deep. What was it that finally got them out of whatever slump they were mired in?
I tell you what, a couple of weak contact hits is probably what really got that inning kicked off. You mentioned the bump, but there was also a couple of base hits. They weren't hit particularly hard, but ultimately that got Urias out of the game, and then Addison Russell does a nice job on a 2-0 fastball and crushes it to center field. What was impressive about his at-bat, he had really been struggling, and there was a lot of questions about whether or not he should even be in the lineup. Him and Jason Hayward both, and Joe Madden was, listen, I need these guys in there for their defense, and he kept showing confidence in them. He didn't want to see them panic, and Addison Russell's struggles go all the way back even to the end of September. I think it was coming into last night since September 20th. He was hitting like 073 over like 61 at-bats. I mean, there was enough there to say, man, this guy is in a severe slump. Joe Madden did not relent. He left him out there. He came through in a big spot. You could see the elation on his face after he hit that home run. But it was contact. It was putting the ball in play, even though it wasn't that hard early on or in the beginning of that 4th inning against Urias, and then the big blow to knock him out. And that got everybody kind of running and going a little bit. Same thing with Anthony Rizzo, who had been in in a pretty bad slump himself, had not hit at all this postseason, had a couple of tough at-bats, but the ability to continue to grind, not put your head down, which you're not going to do in a postseason series, but ultimately getting the pitches that you can handle, not missing them, which they had been, and coming through, and now all of a sudden the confidence is just rolling.
You talk about Joe Madden's decision to play Jason Hayward. He's been bad in this series, as we all know, but he did have an RBI in that fourth inning. But more importantly, as you said, it was about his defense. Now, in the second inning, we saw this, right? A single to right field. He throws out. He beats Adrian Gonzalez to the plate. Was he safe? Because this is what people are going to harp on as a key to this Dodgers loss, even though it probably wasn't, but it's something that we're going to harp on. Was he safe, and did the umpires get it correct?
I tell you what, he certainly looks safe to me. I mean, you watch the finger, and there we get great, unbelievable slow-motion replays now that can zoom in, and it's always we hear the word inconclusive, and they just were not 100% sure if those fingers were down in that left hand. The hand was definitely over home plate before he was tagged, and they were saying they couldn't say definitively whether those fingers were down. They certainly looked down to me. I think across the board, people believe that he was safe, but that's what happens. Now, if they called him safe on the field, and I don't think they would have reversed it the other way either, right? If you challenge it and say, hey, we don't think those hands got down or those fingers got down on the plate, it would have been the same thing. They just were not 100% sure. So what we're seeing here on instant replay is they're not going to take any chances if it's even a tiny bit open for interpretation. They're just going to go ahead and stick with the call that was made on the field. You're right. Ken Rosenthal had a good piece about it today, and just a lot of people upset about it. And it's a good thing that this wasn't a 1-0 game or a 2-1 game, because that would have been even worse.
Yeah.
And, for me, they would not have caught much flack at all had they called him safe. I think we all saw those fingers down, but they felt like it was too close to overturn the call.
Our CBS Sports Radio's host of CBS Eye on Baseball, CJ Nitkowski, joins us here. That show is Saturday, 10 a.m. to noon Eastern. A couple of players that you got to point out that had a fantastic night last night for the Cubs. Wilson Contreras, we saw the pickoff in the first inning on second base, which was just an unbelievable throw. He gets the RBI that gets Zobrist in. Obviously, the tag. I mean, how good was he on this night when the Cubs had to win?
Yeah, this guy's aggressive, and he's confident. And we're seeing that more and more, I think, nowadays from rookies as they come up. They expect to play. They expect to be good. They expect to get it done. I think it's a little bit of a different feel from generations past. Guys like that used to stick out a little bit more. It's become more and more common. I think a lot of that has to do with the attention that they get as amateurs and prospects and their names out there before they even get to the big leagues. And that's exactly who this kid is. You love him. I could see where he is starting to fall into maybe that A.J. Pierzynski kind of mold a little bit. You love him when he's on your team. He kind of irritates you a little bit when he's on the other side, and it's because of the aggressive play, and it's because of the confidence. I mean, confidence is so key, and Joe Madden allows that to happen. So this kid gets a big start, down 2-1 in the NLCS, a lot on his shoulders, not only what he's going to do defensively and with the bat, but also guiding these pitchers and guiding John Lackey, the veteran, through a start and trying to get him to be able to beat these Los Angeles Dodgers, because that wasn't a great matchup for Lackey. So he had a lot on his plate yesterday or last night trying to get this thing done. He came through. I love the aggressiveness. I love the confidence in him. I think this kid's going to be a good player. And what's really unbelievable, too, is that he does a great job behind the plate. You mentioned the pickoff. He's got a rocket for an arm, but then they can also put him in left field. And to do that at such an early age is a really unique thing. And for him to be able to still come out and swing the bat pretty well, not lose that aggressiveness regardless of where he is playing, I think is really special for a young player.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you talk about that aggressiveness and the risk-taking and all those things. It comes from a skip, as we saw with Zobrist getting sent from third. I mean, he was dead to rights. Obviously, it was a bad throw by Andrew Tolles, but that aggressiveness it manifests itself in its players. It comes from their skipper. Last question for you, CJ. We know the series is tied 2-2. Who has the advantage now that the Cubs seemingly have got off that slide a little bit?
Yeah, right now, I mean, you look at Game 5 and what's going to happen here. The pitching matchup certainly favors the Chicago Cubs significantly. That's a big one. If somehow the Dodgers can find a way to squeak this win out, I think it's a really important one for them, because they'll have Clayton Kershaw going in Game 6, and that is big. But on paper right now, it still looks like the Cubs are the better team. I think they're in the better position. They run deeper from a starting pitching standpoint. That's the part that could eventually catch up here to the Los Angeles Dodgers. They went through unbelievable injuries this year, and they do not have their rotation at full strength. We know that about them. That has been their battle the entire year. They're going to continue to battle that throughout the postseason. So the Cubs on paper, if the Dodgers are able to pull this thing off, and they certainly have that possibility with Clayton Kershaw sitting out there, it would be a pretty decent upset at this point.